On PM Express tonight, revocation of investment licenses, assessing the impact. And the impact is a big one that we'll begin to unpack tonight on the show. What is the background to all this? The Securities and Exchange Commission this week began a claim validation, as we're beginning to hear, process for investors of the 53 investment companies. Their licenses have been revoked as of last Friday. Now, the revocation, according to SEC, is to protect the integrity of the securities market and investors as well. There's those who disagree with this particular stated objective, say they make a pitch that, in fact, the action taken by the SEC will have a contrary effect on the economy and the lives of these investors. We'll try and interrogate that other claim as well here on the show tonight. Also, SEC also says the troubled securities firms that have still not been able to address concerns raised about their operations. And this is after several notices to them, engagements with them over the years, and it just become impossible for it to exist, for these fund management companies to continue to exist, still violating the many laws that set them up. And that's why SEC has decided to step in. What are the facts? We know that after the 53 firms that have been shut down, at least they control 56,000 investors. And the amounts there in terms of assets is just about $1 billion cedis. That is huge. Who is going to bear the cost and where is the money going to come from is a key question that we need to bear in mind. Another question that I haven't heard asked, which we'll try and break down, is we've just seen the numbers when it comes to the customers. We've also seen the numbers when it comes to the figures, when it comes to how much asset they're holding. But what about the workers? Workers who work in these firms. How many workers will be affected as well? Beginning to appreciate the impact of this on all aspects of the economy. Now, the Registrar General, we know, will be the receiver, but this has to go through a proper court process for this to become properly legal. Now, the receiver will also scrutinize the payments of funds to the investors. That is, after the validation has been done, they'll go to the process of doing that. Now, affected companies, many of them, but a few of them are important to observe and to highlight. Black Shield, remember, you used to know them as Gold Coast Fund Management. They are one of those companies that have gone under. Why are they interested? Because of their association with Dr. Pakwesi Indom. But also they've been in trouble over the last few weeks and years, struggling to pay their customers. They have gone under as well. Now, the Capital, also in Capital Limited, the Apex Capital Partners have also gone under as part of this. Axe Capital, you know this. It's a very familiar artwork there representing this company that had been in existence for some time and is no more because of the infractions. We know that a lot of issues have come up as a result of the closure. The Group Indum Limited, managers of the Black Shield, have issued a statement challenging the decision by SEC to close it down. They raise a few issues. One is that they've been in consultation with SEC itself, asking SEC to help them retrieve funds locked up with many government entities. SEC, they say, had failed to heed that and had gone ahead to close them down. They also dispute some of the basis, really, for their closure. That is Group Indums. Also, they have expressed disappointment in the SEC for the decision they've taken, review its plan to migrate its customer. That's not something they wanted to do at Gold Coast Fund Management or Black Shield. Again, they say SEC didn't allow them to do that. As I've been saying in this particular intro, is the key thing to look at is to assess the impact of this on the economy, one, but most importantly, lives are at stake here. And how is SEC going to manage this process going forward? It goes beyond SEC, I must say. It goes to the government itself, because a huge chunk of the repayment of the $1 billion or the capped amount that will go to the customers, the government will have to bear it. A few of these questions we'll try and unpack tonight. And again, SEC had given themselves a Monday close of day deadline to sort of give details about how payments will be made and where you should go, claim validation. Of course, we've long past close of day. We'll get an update for you. So stay with us here on PMS. We won't return. My guests are seated and we'll begin to unpack the key issues. And you're live on the JoyNews channel. My name is Evans Mensah. This is PM Express. My guest in the studio is Paul Abebio. He is a Deputy Director General, Securities and Exchange Commission. Thank you very much, Paul, for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.
Also with us is Emmanuel Alexa Sedu. He is the President of the Ghana Securities Industry Association. Emmanuel, thank you also for joining me. Also joining us is Joe Jackson. He's the Director of Strategy and Business Operations at Dalex Finance, also joining us via live link. Joe Jackson, thank you very much also for joining us. And as you can see there, he would join us with his input as well on this conversation. Paul, let me start with you.
Thank you
in your statement, you said that by close of day Monday, you would, together with the authorized agent, provide further details about the validation process as well as the specific locations where people could go to get validated on their claims. Safe to say that we're long past close of day. Do you have the details for people who are anxious watching to know what to do next?
It's still close of day. The day has closed. But we'll issue a press statement to that effect. So it's not ready yet. We're still putting a few logistical matters in place, and then we will come out with the statements in the course of tomorrow.
So people should still
hold on. We will give the specific locations where they can actually go to indicate or to give us their validations.
I put some facts out just to clarify that briefly as we assess the impact of this. When you put all the 53 together in terms of assets, how much are we talking about?
We're talking about 8 billion.
8 billion cedis, that's a lot. And the figure that I was giving was in terms of the customers you're holding, 53,000?
Well, the total is about 57,000.
Customers.
77,000 customers, retail customers.
Okay.
Then there's another 4,000 institutional customers. So you add 4,700 to 77,000. You get about 81,700 customers.
Customers.
In total.
Okay,
Yes.
I see. How many workers will be affected by this? Do we know yet?
We're still doing the assessment, but if you bear in mind, some of the firms we're dealing with here were no longer operating. So, in a sense, those employees are not necessarily affected because the firms have actually closed operations. Then you have the remaining firms, some of whom have downsized. We had 249 people as licensed representatives. So these are typically your client-facing workers who are trained in investments and in capital markets matters. A typical firm might have other people, say there are finance functions, there are HR functions, there are people who may not necessarily be known to us. So we looked at those who are known to us, that's the 249, and bearing in mind that people have downsized as the firms went through moments of distress, they also try to downsize their operations, sometimes without notifying us. And one of the observations was that we actually require that a fund manager has at least 3 representatives, because people go on leave and you always need backups and stuff like that. So sometimes you'd find some firms having only 2 representatives or only 1 representative, when in our records they have 3. So if we go on our investigation, they tell us, oh, this person has left. And so that also became an issue, because then how do you function without a qualified personnel? And the person who is replacing them, do they have the requisite training? Have they been introduced to the commission? So some of these issues were also at stake in considering that the impact of our action really on the market and on the industry. But a key thing that we bore in mind was that the employment debate, is it better to have people gainfully employed or just employed? And we consider that protecting investors, if we have a stronger capital market coming out of this action, the capital market creates so much jobs for the lawyers, for the accountants, for the valuers, for the other service providers. So in a sense, taking this action ensures that we have a more resilient marketplace, where the players that people interact with are also able to perform their duties with the necessary care and caution. So in a sense, this action also seeks to preserve the space. And all said and done, when we engage, when we get to the liquidation process, they might bring some of these people back into their business because they'll be needed to give insights into how these businesses have worked. So that's a bit on that side.
Emmanuel, let me come to you on the back of that. Cost-benefit analysis. You're a player in that sector. You're the president of the association. Was this worth it?
Yes, it was. It was. I think if we will fault the SEC, it's that this probably took a bit too long in coming. It should have been done. Like you said, I mean, there'll be costs, but it seems that the long-term gains far outweigh the costs. Clean up, take corrective action, let's move on. And I mean, a lot of the firms were walking dead anyway. So it's worthwhile that this has been done.
Yeah, I mean, let me bring in Joe Jackson. Joe, as long as I've heard you talk about this issue, I have heard you signal that there's something going on that should have been dealt with sooner than later. I just heard the president make the same point. So, you play in this sector. Why wasn't this done before? And if it had been done earlier, would it have lessened the impact? We're talking about 8 billion. We're talking about more than 80,000 asset holders. We are now assessing customers, workers that may go. Should it have come earlier, as President has said? You agree with that?
Essentially, I agree with that. This thing should have been done earlier. The challenge we have is that it took so long to fix. And with each passing day, with each passing week, a lot more people were sucked into that mess. And there's a lot more pain we are taking on now that we should have stopped the bleeding a long time ago. What we should do is appreciate the current regime who have been able to really face up to the problems. And at the same time, condemn those who have sat down for this to get so bad. This should have been done a long, long time ago. It is just so terrible that it's taking so long and it's going to cost the public purse so much.
Now, that is an important point about so much. I want to quickly bring in Paul. Paul, 8 billion is a scary figure. If you put it in the context of where we are coming from, as in banking sector cleanup, as in savings and loans, the president has said we are now inching above 15 billion, right? How are we going to afford this?
Well, the 8 billion figure is not all at risk, right? So we have about 2.5 billion spread across investments in government instruments, listed companies, and then the banks. Then we have roughly another 700 or so million in the microfinance and rural banks.
Rural banks?
Yes, the fund managers.
This is where they put their funds.
No, as in fund managers place some funds with the rural banks. So
interesting. Why
rural banks also place some funds with the fund managers.
So this is all.
So there'll be some sort of netting off and some reconciliation will be done to determine the net position. And so I think that's one leg of it. The other leg becomes recovery of the 4 billion. And I will say that, I mean, recovering assets is also a financial practice. And it's unfortunate that the fund managers had to get to this point, because at the point where your investments are in distress, you start to take strong remediative action. You start to take action to recover. Either you recognize the losses and you tackle the borrowers. And so to a certain extent, the question becomes that if you're not tackling the borrowers, then what is going on? Are you actually acting in the interest of your investors? When your investors are crying out for help, when they are not able to access. We've seen people who are sick, who are on death's bed, coming to the commission in tears, literally. And it is heart-wrenching to see this. And so from a humanitarian perspective, and from an ethical perspective as to what do you do when people have trusted you with your resources? How do you stretch the little value you have to be able to meet their requirements. And seeing this, as people have said, that it's gone on for long, because we also gave them some time to take action. We called on them for meetings. We wrote to them at various points in time. Some of them made representations. Some of them made denials that turned out to be false. And so in all this is where we come to the conclusion that, look, we have to draw the line. We have to protect the investor. We have to also protect the industry. We have to protect the citizens, because this also becomes a reputational issue for Ghana. We have to protect, even the budget. And to your question about where will the money come from, in the midst of all this financial crisis, government still has to make some resources available for this. So this was also a discussion we had to have with ministry, that we are about to take this action.
Were you giving the guarantees?
We've gotten some commitments, yes.
Okay, from government.
From government.
They'll bear all the 8 billion, or you're hoping now to get a chunk of that from assets recovery?
Well, government has not committed to bear all of that,
okay.
and that should be clear from day one. What government is seeking to do is to provide some relief to investors. So it'll be a limited amount, and it's really a social intervention that they are doing in the interest of supporting the citizens. In other jurisdictions, you might have what they call an investor protection fund. So we're actually talking to government as part of this exercise. If we have to spend so much to clean up, we should allocate some resources to future events like this. Not that we'll have such events, but...
You're not saying that we should anticipate...
No, we need to have some structures to mitigate when you find certain actions. You can, one, trigger certain clauses and then start the process much earlier. Right, so there are processes that you have to execute, and in the absence of some of these mechanisms, where complaints come and it comes to sex, sometimes you have an ombudsman, somebody who mediates in between. So in essence, this is really an attempt to have a middle ground, given the absence of such a social framework, so that investors are able to have some respite. Then once we go into the liquidation phase, whatever assets are retrieved from these businesses, investors will be paid out of this. So government is looking at a capped amount.
How much is this?
We'll announce that we have to do a validation. We have to assess the extent or the dispersion of investors. We have to look at the groupings within each of these fund managers, the kinds of client base they have, and then a determination.
I keep asking that because of the, I'll come to you, Mano, shortly, but the anxiety this is causing people with monies in these fund managers that have gone. Wasn't have been put in rather to, but at the time of announcement, all these things will be out there. You've asked people remain calm, but if I'm not getting information, I give you Monday close of day. We still don't have the press statement. That is going to contribute to anxiety. It's going to contribute to people wondering, without information, you know what happens. And this is the financial sector, very sensitive to lack of information.
I think that's why we've also come out to discuss the processes we follow. And the steps around it. Clearly, in terms of people's anxieties, we appreciate that. And one of the things we encourage, we also say people should keep calm, because to be fair, some of these firms have had lapses for a while. So investors in these firms actually appreciate that what we've done now, in a sense, gives more visibility. They're not knowing what's actually happening and not knowing what steps we'll take. One of the challenges we face is that the legal regime covering our industry, some of the activities are actually outside our remits. For instance, the liquidation process, we actually have to write to the registrar, then she's going to apply to the court.
Has she done that already?
We've written to her. She has to.
You don't know whether she has done her part.
She's putting it together. She'll go to court in the course of the next week or so. She'll do that court process. So our attempt to put in place logistics to collect information. When the registrar goes into liquidation, she'll actually ask people to come and bring their claims. So what we are doing is really to support that process, right? So and that is where the SEC is acting as, I would say, a resolver or a supporter of the social interest, because our law empowers us to take certain actions.
Which you're taking.
Which is what we are taking. But you don't just take an action and sit back. With Bank of Ghana, they can take an action and they can make certain appointments, right? We have to go to court to make those appointments. And in a sense, it's a bit preemptive to to make those appointments when you haven't made a decision to revoke or when you haven't announced the revocation yet. Because our sequence, those appointments are outside our remit. We have to go to court and say, appoint these people because
we've done this.
We've done this.
Emmanuel, so you understand industry. How did we get here?
The number of factors. I guess it's, so first, it's ourselves. It's poor governance and ethics. I mean, people allowed things to happen to client funds that shouldn't have happened. Self-dealing, lack of a proper investment process, etc. So what I explain to people is just take what happened in the banking sector, change the name from banking sector to investment industry, and it's the same things that happened. That's the first one. But what is important to note also is that we have a really under-resourced regulator, and I guess we would have to
This is SEC.
doff our hats off to the current regime at the top there for taking this action. There's an oft-touted stat that Paul and Reverend Ogbami and his people normally throw out, that they have less than 65 personnel, and you have drivers and secretaries amongst them. Now, let's get this straight. The investment industry is growing at a healthy clip, much faster than the banking sector. 10 years ago, assets under management, less than 1.2 billion, currently 40 billion. Banking assets over 115 billion.
40 billion
yes.
CDs.
Yes, and you have 60 people, drivers and secretaries included, monitoring this, under-resourced. It was bound to happen. So poor governance and ethics, poor under-resourced, and I guess if you add those two together, this was what was going to happen. And lack of enforcement, but I guess that's linked to there not being adequately resourced.
I'm going to come to the enforcement bit, but I want to stay with the impact a bit more. I want to bring Joe Jackson in on this because I saw your statement, and part of it says that there's also the need for there's no need for panic withdrawals on the firms whose licenses are intact and not on the revocation list. Because now the fear is, I see this, even if my firm is in Joe Jackson's firm, I might run on Joe Jackson because it's just a blowback from the rest. And that's just key for me to try and dig into how we're trying to avoid that, because it could have a whole big blow up on the rest of the sector. Joe Jackson, please give me your comments on this. I checked the list that SEC says we should check on the website. In Ghana, people really don't do that. And I checked, your fund management company is there as one of those listed companies doing well, right? I'm just curious whether you have any fears that what has just happened might have unintended consequences on the likes of yourself who are doing the right thing and respecting the laws of the land.
Well, first of all, this always has an unintended consequence. Look at what happened in the banking sector. Everybody gets started with the same brush. So one of the things that every fund manager and even the local finance houses, etc., should get ready for is there's going to be some amount of panic withdrawal. That is going to happen. And the sad thing is this. In every jurisdiction where this has happened, the firms that are deemed fit and proper to continue business have received an injection of liquidity to ensure that they survive the unintended consequences. But that hasn't happened here. And that's one of the saddest parts of this whole process, because there are two ways to restore this sector back to health. One way is really to quickly say, we're going to better regulate, we're going to give the regulator resources, we're going to check them, we're going to make sure people who are fit and proper are at the helm of affairs. But another way is also to make sure that firms that are in existence, that are healthy, receive access to liquidity that can keep and restore confidence in the system.
Yes.
Can I add something to that? So first of all, a caveat. I really don't think that much has changed, because, and I think Paul mentioned that earlier, of the 53 firms whose licenses have been revoked, 21 were already not operating anyway. So it's just the 32 or so that we need to talk about. The majority of them already had issues. So I would think that to a large extent, clients were not getting their monies anyway. So I don't think anything has changed on the investment landscape. All that has changed is that we see the regulator articulating what the issues were and saying that we are cutting the rod. So I don't see the need for investors to panic. But to add to speak to Joe Jackson's point, and I think that's important, there is a certain exposure that investment firms, even those who are doing relatively well, have to the savings and loans and microfinance institutions. And I mean, we hear tell...
As in they put monies there or...
Yes, I mean, they invested their exposure, so they invested there. And we hear tell from the central bank that depositors on that side will be paid. Now, you have clients of investment management firms who are saying, you say that you have exposures, you've invested in this sector. The government, the central bank says it's paying out. So how come you're not giving me back my money? In effect, what Joe Jackson is saying is that until fund management firms can be given those exposures back, there'll still be a bit of noise in the sector because there's still a liquidity squeeze there. I mean, there are some firms that are okay, and most will do all right. But for now, there's that challenge, and that has to be looked at. And I want to take this opportunity to ask the SEC and the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank to look at this, because I think that sometimes we forget that the investment sector is the last mile in the intermediation process, and if it's neglected, we can't do a full cleanup.
Paul, want to respond to that?
No, I think we're aware of the knock-on effects. We've brought this to the attention of the ministry, and we've had discussions with the Bank of Ghana as well. And so part of I would say the bailout is to look at what kind of solutions can be made available to the remaining investment firms. And so that's a discussion that's ongoing now. And I think that framework hopefully will be also be finalized soon. So I think
you're talking about far more than 8 billion then, if you add that to...
You'll be double counting, I guess.
You'll be double counting because you also have some of the exposures we talk about includes those in the microfinance. So if you net that out, you don't necessarily have to bail out those who have been revoked. And then the question becomes, what kind of structures can you work around the remaining firms? What would make sense given the environment we are in, and what kinds of haircuts would need to be applied? So that will also be discussed. It's being discussed as we speak, and that's also part of the considerations leading up to this exercise.
Let me bring in Joe on this. Joe, just what you just heard there, SEC is confirming that conversations are already underway to deal with the concerns that both you and Ima have just touched on. In terms of assessing the impact, though, will that be enough? And what more needs to be done so that this become a win medium to long term?
Well, first of all, we have no reason to doubt the sincerity of the authorities. So if they say this is what they're doing, we have to believe that they're doing it. But I tell you that it is something that must take serious consideration and must be attended to fairly quickly. So it's not something you can kick down the road and hope it'll fix itself.
Give me a sense of, you are in the space. Give me, since last week Friday, I think, when this first emerged, in real terms, because you have your finger on the pulse, what has happened in your industry since last Friday?
Okay. Well, every client, any number of clients have called since this morning, and we had an early morning meeting to talk to the relationship managers and to get the sense of what's happening. And everybody's calling and saying what's happening, and their primary job is to reassure them, to say, listen, your funds are okay. The list of organizations that have gone under are published, check. But even then, some people are saying, you know what, just give me my money. And we are paying everybody who wants his money back, because the moment you stop paying back is the moment your institution goes under.
Comment on this. This sounds scary for me. I'm not holding any of these companies, but knowing what I know in the sector, what he's saying is the beginning of a lot of the problems that some of them have had. I mean, comment on this for me. People are watching and listening.
Yes.
And this is the only thing we can do to try and calm nerves. Other than that, we're going to have a bigger problem on our hands.
Yes. I mean, what he's saying is that the solution has to be, the cut has to be quick and clean so that we can move ahead. I agree with him on that. I don't know about Dalex and whether investors are asking for their monies, but the anecdotal evidence we have on the ground for now is that there is a bit of calm.
Okay.
And so, since I'm not with him, I can't speak for it, but we are okay.
This is, okay. Okay, which firm do you?
Stanley.
Okay.
But, so that speaks to my point that not much has really changed. It's just the SEC that has articulated what was happening. 21 firms, almost half or a bit more than a third of the number of firms whose licenses have been revoked were already not operating. So if you wanted your money, you wouldn't have had it anyway. The other 32, like I said, they were walking dead. Sorry to use that expression again. So it's not as if you'd gone there last month before the SEC took this action, you would have had your funds anyway. So I hope that gives you a bit of perspective.
I get the picture you're painting.
But I also think that the press should also be circumspect with their narrative. First of all, it's not 8 billion. He's clearly spelled out that it's closer to 4 billion. The more we drop those figures, the more there's a sense of...
No, I think he mentioned 8 billion.
No, there's some in government securities.
Yes. I mean, but he gave a global figure.
Yes, but you see, it's not that global figure that is at risk. Okay. It's a smaller amount. You can confirm or
No,
otherwise.
I'm talking about how much the assets were worth.
But that's why I say that the narrative. So somebody walking outside will say 8 billion. But it's actually not the 8 billion that we can't take. It's about half of that. So I'm saying that we all need to come together to control the narrative, because from where I sit, both as a fund manager and as somebody who's worked in the industry for a while, the effect here does not seem to be as big as the effect on when the first banks were closed down. So I would think that this is action that is okay so far as the SEC can move quickly to put out the logistics so that there's a clean cut, corrective measures are taken, people are supposed to be paid are paid. I think that things will be fine.
I want to come back to that, because I guess for most people this is the main concern. The pace of trying to do this clean cut. Already you're behind time in terms of their own timelines for giving further details on the way forward. In your statement, that was a key thing you were asking for: clear way forward, timelines that you respect. What is holding back the quick dealing of the way forward issues? I mean, if I had funds in anybody of them right now, tonight, I'll be absolutely lost what to do. Can you give me any assurances when calming nerves is important here?
No, I think we, and maybe we've said this in the past, investment is a patient game. And while we are taking corrective actions, we've also had to be patient in how we move, because it has implications across board. And I think to the point of the extent of this, to put things in size, right? A typical bank would have about 100,000 customers or 200,000 customers. In this industry, of the 53 firms combined, we're talking about 77,000, tops 85,000. Say we are missing some customers, 90,000 people. So from a sizing perspective, that's one dimension. Then from the figures perspective, I think the 8 billion, if you ask us today, what are the assets under management of these firms? That is why we've put that number there. Okay. But to Alex's point, the finesse to it is that about 2.5 billion is in government securities, is in banks and listed. I think I mentioned that earlier on. And then another 300 or so is with other asset managers, including some amongst the revoked. I hope you see what I'm saying.
Yes.
So technically now we are down to almost 5. And out of the 5, we are double counting about 300. So we're looking roughly around 4.7. So I think that's one dynamic to it. The other dynamic, as I mentioned, was that certain activities, we need other parties to also act. we need information to be transmitted and for responses before we even take some actions. And we are conscious of this, so I think we gave some time frame. We're working hard to stay within that window.
Some
now
of the time frames have been missed already.
Some have been missed.
At least one has been missed.
Yes, things will move a little bit, but I don't expect it to move too far out.
Can you give people an estimation of the time frame you're working with now, knowing what you know as of this morning?
I think we would encourage people to be patient. This week we'll come out with clear time frames. We'll come out with the logistics that need to be done, but people should be patient, and that we are keeping an eye on things. We have a sense, we have the places on lockdown, so assets are being preserved. I think that was one of the first things, preserving the assets.
These are fiscal assets. What about the
physical and financial assets?
The financial assets. So you're frozen accounts? Or I know you can't. Can you by yourself, or you have to use another agency too?
We don't have direct powers on that.
Okay.
So we have to go to the courts to do that as well.
So assets of these 53, have they been frozen? I mean, so when I say assets, I mean financial assets. I mean fiscal assets. You said in your statement you have people there already, but financial assets, bank accounts frozen?
I will not answer that question.
But that is so important for me.
Yes.
Why can't you answer that?
I think we can move beyond that
But
point.
I don't even think he meant those assets when he was talking about assets being...
Yes, I'm talking about the allocations.
Yes.
Investment
assets.
Investment assets.
Client investment assets.
Yeah,
not
but
the assets of the
But
owners
clients'
of the
investment assets will sit in a bank account.
Not necessarily. I mean, if you've exposed yourself to government paper, for example.
Yeah, of course. So it's with government. So that's one.
I think I just want us to make that distinction that when he spoke about assets, he didn't mean the assets of the owners of these.
Of course. I mean, that's a different level of pursuit of recovery. But I'm talking about investor assets, financial assets that are put in a company. If it's not even investment, it's in some accounts. I'm just curious to know whether these have been, whether you have the icy hand or the status already on these.
We are going through the processes. We're going through the processes, and I think in due time, some of these things will be in place.
Okay.
So from an action standpoint, what we will also do really is to communicate to the judiciary and to the Attorney General on these actions, because again, as I mentioned, because we rely on the court process and the court frameworks, we're seeking that the court also acts quickly on some of these things. And I mean, while the banking sector is complicated, capital market has another layer of complexity, because on one hand, with the bank, they're supposed to guarantee your return. With an investment firm, they deal in all kinds of assets, including equities. So then the valuation and the discussions around what are contractual obligations and what are the net assets at any point in time are also subject to further review. So we'll be working with the Attorney General, with IOCO, and with CID to make sure that all these things are linked together. Okay. And that process has also been kicked off.
I'm happy you mentioned CID. What's the level of the involvement in the way forward at this moment?
I mean, so far they've actually brought some names to our attention.
For what purpose?
Under investigation, names that were already under investigation. As we were doing our investigations, also doing investigations in parallel.
Owners?
Firms, okay. Some individuals as well. But IOCO will be the principal party. For CID, we'll bring them in as and when necessary. And I think part of this exercise also, we are all learning about some of these things and how to deal with financial malfeasance. And it's a highly specialized investigative skill. And to Alex's point, investigating these things require people who understand these kinds of things. It's one thing licensing and going to monitor and assuming the reports that are submitted to you are correct. But once you find inaccuracies, how do you delve into things? How do you dice the information that's been submitted and make sure that you're able to get a deep dive as quickly as possible?
Talking about that, I need to ask you this. I read your statement. One of the things that jumped at me, 21, and we kept on mentioning that number, 21 of them have already closed their offices, and the words used were, and absconded with the client's funds without due process. I don't know anything about this industry, but my question was, in this highly regulated environment, how is this even possible that not one, not two, 21 have already closed and absconded, to use your own words? How, in God's name, is that even possible?
I wish I could answer that.
No, I mean, maybe I should bring Joe Jackson in and I'll come back to you. Think about that, because that was my fundamental question. Joe Jackson, can you answer that question?
Well, I can't. What I can say is that those who were complicit in sitting through their inaction and actions that allowed 21 companies to get away with it, they should be held responsible. I mean, we can't just allow this to pass by. It's not done. We've allowed this. We've operated as if this was the Wild West.
What do you want to see done?
I don't have an answer. All I have to say is that, listen, somebody must be held responsible.
Somebody.
And even if it's just 1 billion cedis at stake.
Go on,
what
Joe.
is our total public debt? What? 200 billion? Can we allow 1 billion to be added without any consequences?
Yeah.
So I think I'll come in there on that. So
how did this happen? 21 absconded.
I mean, some of the firms on the non-operating list did not actually have any assets under management. Some also, and I think people can also, I would say, run away. And that's why I bring in the Yoko and the CID, because we're going to do a people trace. And in this digital age, there are ways to find people. There are ways to trace assets. Where have they gone? And what do you do wherever they've gone? How do you bring it back into the system? And I think that is also part of the work that has gone on, getting the right resources to do some of these exercises.
Do you know where these 21 people are? 21 firms.
We know where some of them are.
So not all.
Not all.
That is
Not
a regulatory failure,
Not
surely.
Well, as a regulator, I mean, we also have to improve. And I think to Joe's point, in a sense, we are developing, and that is part of the developmental phase you go through. It is tough, it is heartbreaking, and to a certain extent, there's a lot more that needs to be done.
But you'll
bear with us that
you'll bear with us. Failure.
No, you'll bear with us. A lot has been done, and part of what we've also
part of the healing process is regulator also being humble enough to admit, guys, we slept on the job at some point. Maybe we are awake now, but to 21 firms to run away with people's funds in this highly regulated environment, somebody, as he said, might be held accountable, including the regulator.
I mean, we will say that we could have done some things better, but a lot of progress has been done. I mean, there's been work going on in the past. There's work that's still going on. So, yes, there were some challenges. Some firms have gone through issues that the regulator could have been more nimble in responding. And I think that's another discussion too. What is the role of the regulator? How do we resource the regulator in this environment, in this increasingly complex and technologically enabled world? Is the regulator having the right financial resources to be able to take some of these actions? Do they have the right people in place to deliver on their mandate?
What's your answer to all those questions? Do you have the right people, the number required, the adequate number? Do you have all that?
We don't.
Okay.
And so even as we do this cleanup, we're still struggling with the same issues that brought us here. And I think that's part of the discussion we've had with the ministry, that look, we do need, in as much as we do this cleanup, if we don't transform the commission and the process, we'll still be facing the same issues. And I think in terms of, well, there's been some transformation. So let me nuance that, because as we speak, we've just finalized what we call a capital markets master plan. And that involved all the stakeholders. It involved various other participants. We've shared with some international people who have also brought feedback into it. And the idea is really to develop, where do we want to go? Where do we want the markets to go from where we're standing now? I mean, we talk about technology. How do people even access these fund managers? Are they technologically enabled? We find that people are taking cash to people's branches. That's a clear case for people to just siphon the money. So when you talk about people have absconded, if a fund manager is handling cash and then has to move it to the bank. Between that, let's say between the hand and the mouth, a lot get lost, right? And so dealing with some of these issues, we've also just finished our IT strategy because we also want to have what we call an IT master plan that looks at how we see the markets becoming digitally enabled. Now, that's going to be a first because we have to also spell out minimum technology standards for the industry players. We'll be consulting with them in the next few weeks on this issue. Because
on
part
Joe's
of it...
point, forgive me because of time, just on Joe's point quickly, will there be prosecutions? You said people, this asset, well, that people tracing, where they've been, etc., Yoko, will there be prosecutions?
That's actually why I was mentioning the Attorney General and Yoko. So we are very mindful of that. Government too is concerned that this financial sector issues is costing so much, and the need to ensure that people who have caused these losses are held to account, and that the right frameworks are also put in place to prevent future occurrences.
So I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, Emma and Joe, I'll come to see you and making a lot of notes on this particular point. I know you have a lot to say. I'll take that and I'll also end on, so how do we prevent this from happening again? I think it's a big question as we approach the resolution to this particular problem. Stay with us. On PM Express tonight, 5 minutes to end the show, and we need to get to a few things. Ima and Joe, I'll come to you shortly. Tell me, is it fair to hold SEC wholly responsible for what has become known as a regulatory failure, a monumental regulatory failure?
Yes, but not fully. And there has to be historical context. This thing started years ago. And like I said, if those who were there before this current set had probably helped to solve this or had been given the support to solve this, we probably wouldn't have gotten here. So we need to look at it in perspective. They were under-resourced, they should have upped their game, but if I were sitting in their shoes, I would find it hideously difficult to chase after 148 firms with 60 personnel, when I'm not even sure. I think they are off government subvention too. I don't even know where they get their resources from. That's difficult. So I would like to look at it in perspective. And I would also like to chip in that really, it's not just regulatory failure within our sector. It's moral failure across all sectors of our society. You know that. Whatever it is, mention it. There are always issues. And so until we can start thinking about putting others first before ourselves, no matter the laws and the rules and whatever it is, we'll come back here and talk about this.
Joe, talking about regulatory failure, how do we make sure this is the last time this ever happens in the space you operate?
Well, first and foremost, we've got to enforce rules about fit and proper persons managing and governing and owning these institutions. That is absolutely critical. It's also important for us all to realize that increasing the capital requirement in the case of the fund managers from 100,000 to 2 million, and in the case of commercial banks from 100 million to 400 million is not a magic bullet. In and itself, it won't solve anything. We'll get back here if we don't make sure that we resource the regulators, bring them up to speed in current trends, and ensure that fit and proper persons are running these institutions.
Ima, how do we make sure this is the last time we are having this conversation?
Well, Joe just mentioned a bit of it, but I guess apart from that, we need to educate ourselves a bit more. Within the industry, there are people who make genuine mistakes, and partly because either they didn't know about the investment process or they didn't understand the ethics that guide this kind of work. So there has to be education of industry players and of the investment public, so that people know how to ask the right questions when somebody walks up to them and says, I have an entity that can give you 45% per annum. I mean, when T-bill rates are averaging 40%. So there needs to be more education. And then we, like he said, we need to resource the regulator a bit more. We need to get people who have a have a strong ethical bent who will be in this industry. That's the fit and proper thing he's talking about. And then we need a bigger culture of enforcement. Wrong is wrong, right is right.
Talk about enforcement. What do you expect to see on the back of this latest debacle? Prosecution? What do you expect? What consequences are you expecting?
In an ideal world, yes, but we know that we are in a less than ideal world, so I don't know. I mean,
oh goodness.
I hope that there will be prosecution.
That's pessimism. You hope, but
I hope. But I mean, let's add a dose of realism to this. So I hope that we will get where we want to get to. I hope that the proper signals are sent to all of us so that we do the right things going forward.
Paul, bullet for me. How are you making sure this is the last time this will ever happen?
No, so we are enhancing our supervision and monitoring. Alex made the point about education, and really I think part of the regulator's work is a bit complicated because you not only have to understand the industry, you have to know how to regulate the industry, right? So it's another level of complexity that you need to invest in people, you need to invest in processes, and you need to invest in capacity building.
Are you employing more people? 60 is something what it's just inadequate.
Yes, we'll find the balance. We're also digitizing our operations. So normally, when you digitize, you have to train your people on how to use the technology. And then after you do that, you right-size the organization. Then you determine what are the gaps. We've done some gap analysis on the people side. We've done the gap analysis on the technology side. Now we are implementing the technology transformation. Once we've done that, then we can fill the people gaps. Because if you think you need sort of people to key in data, and now data is being digitally entered, because as of now, that's one of the problems, entering the data. But if you are receiving data digitally, that's a low quality skill that is no longer needed. What you need are maybe big data analytics, computer scientists,
just because we're ending, if you can give me the one big intervention that you're doing right now to make sure this is the very last one we're seeing. This is the one most important on the list of things you're doing now to do.
I think that's a big one. I think the fit and proper test, that's part of our new conduct of business guidelines is critical.
We're going to enforce this hard.
We're going to enforce it really
on existing
hard. On existing, on new. So we're coming up with some continuous education that will require people to take. And so, because as it is now, we don't have a continuing program. So people have to continue to improve themselves. They have to become up to speed with current trends and finance, and even with technology, with auditing, with performance management, even in the organizations. So we'll provide an avenue for that. And I think that'll be part of our test. That have you done the necessary capacity building? Have you installed the right people in the right places? Going forward.
Paul, thank you very much. This is just a process, and so it just begun. I'm sure we'll reconnect again sometime later down the line. Emmanuel, thank you very much. Joe, thank you very much with your input. We'll see how this unfolds. When they're ready with the details for you, those who invested, we'll get that and share with you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.